Greetings, my dear friends, and welcome to another episode of Reading Epic Threads. I'm your host, Patrick Gunnels, joining you from Houston, Texas. And today is March 16th, 2025 at 11:57 a.m. Central Daylight Time. I'm going to be doing one piece today, but first I want to remind you that as I am now independent, please do me a favor and go to tulipblooms.shop or epicminerals.net for the best health and skincare products the world has ever known. And now, as a special offering to you, use promo code FREEDOM30 for 30% off. One-time use, so make it count. And now, without further ado, the newest from Joe Lange. From badlands.substack.com, America for Sale, Part 3, Sanctions Are a Scam, by Joe Lange. Hostages have been a template for the CIA shadow government for many years. It has been a part of a strategy to fool the American people. Hostages have been used as a cover story to hide treasonous operations because the enemy knows that hostages will garner sympathy from the American people. Back in 2009, North Korea had taken 2 journalists hostage and was accusing them of spying. Kim Jong-il had requested that Bill Clinton come personally to North Korea in order to negotiate their release. Why? There's more to this story than most people know. According to BuzzFeed, quote, former President Bill Clinton's 2009 visit to North Korea went so well that the then ruler of the communist country invited Clinton back to take in the sights. According to a memo attached to a hacked email, Kim Jong-il, father of current ruler Kim Jong-un, asked that President Clinton return often, officially and unofficially, suggesting that he visit again to tour someday when there were no problems in bilateral relations. Clinton seemed open to the idea, saying he would like someday to visit the beautiful seaside location depicted in the painting in the entry hall of the Pai Kwan Wan guest house. Chairman Kim said he would show him a much more beautiful place and that President Clinton should come back to the DPRK on holiday. End quote. This wasn't just a diplomatic visit to negotiate the release of hostages. It was something more. The friendly email between them wasn't supposed to be made public. They were acting like old friends instead of adversaries in tough hostage negotiations. More from BuzzFeed, quote, the memo was discovered attached to an email sent to John Podesta, who accompanied Clinton on his mission. Podesta, a former White House chief of staff under Clinton and then head of the Liberal Center for American Progress, is now serving as campaign chair for former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton's presidential campaign. WikiLeaks has been slowly publishing emails from Podesta's account, which researchers believe was hacked by Russian hackers over the past several weeks. End quote. We have been lied to forever. North Korea was painted as our enemy and a danger to world peace. It was all a charade. This friendly relationship between Bill Clinton and the leader of North Korea was revealed in a Podesta email that was released by WikiLeaks. The focus wasn't on the hostages. That was always just the cover story. Why did Bill Clinton really go to North Korea? Was it to negotiate a hostage release, or was it a deal for something else? Q posted a picture of this secret hostage negotiation event with no comment. Q drop number 227 of November 24th, 2017. Clinton's closest aide, Doug Band, is standing right behind Kim Jong-il. I revealed his importance in a previous article. He was working for the Clinton Foundation and Clinton Global Initiative at the time. John Podesta is right behind Bill Clinton in this picture. His emails were the ones being exposed on WikiLeaks. Podesta had worked in the Clinton administration and he was serving as an aide to Obama during these hostage negotiations. These negotiations were under the radar at the time. But why did Kim Jong-il want Bill Clinton to negotiate these hostage negotiations? Answer: this wasn't the first time they had negotiated with each other. Bill Clinton and Kim Jong-il already had a working relationship. Do you remember their negotiations back in 1994? According to the History Channel, quote, President Bill Clinton took the podium on October 18, 1994, with a speech that reads like a sigh of relief: the announcement of a landmark nuclear agreement between the United States and North Korea. This agreement is good for the United States, good for our allies, and good for the safety of the entire world, he assured the nation. Called the Agreed Framework, it was designed to put the brakes on North Korea's nuclear program, and it promised to put an end to years of increasing nuclear tension, including a near war, to a halt. Clinton touted this deal as a landmark nuclear agreement back in 1994. He said that it would halt North Korea's nuclear weapons development and bring tension between the two nations to an end. How did that work out? North Korea broke the agreement almost immediately as they resumed developing nuclear weapons at their underground facility. And what did President Clinton promise the leader of North Korea back in 1994? More from the History Channel. Quote, just 4 pages long, the agreement said that North Korea would shut down its main nuclear reactor in Yongbyon, abandon 2 others, and seal fuel that could potentially be used to create a nuclear weapon. In exchange, the U.S. would provide oil to make up for the fuel lost from the dismantled plants and would build 2 new light fuel plants from which it would be harder to extract nuclear materials. Clinton promised to help build 2 nuclear plants for North Korea. Does that make any sense? Why would you help North Korea build nuclear plants if you're trying to prevent them from making nuclear weapons? This Clinton deal was never meant to prevent North Korea from getting nuclear weapons. That was the scam. The key to this 1994 Clinton deal with North Korea was actually oil. North Korea was under sanctions at the time. Clinton promised to lift those sanctions and provide oil if North Korea would stop building nuclear weapons. But by providing oil to North Korea, it actually allowed them to reallocate their cash towards their nuclear weapons program. Giving them oil actually helped them develop nuclear weapons even faster. We purposely sped up their development of nuclear weapons. This deal never had anything to do with preventing North Korea from obtaining nuclear weapons. It was always about money. Where was Clinton going to get this oil for North Korea? Guess what Clinton did just 5 months after making this North Korean deal? According to Wikipedia, quote, United States President Bill Clinton imposed some of the toughest sanctions against Iran in March 1995 during the presidency of Akbar Hashemi Rafsanjani in response to the Iranian nuclear program and Iranian support for Hezbollah, Hamas, and the Palestine Islamic Jihad that are considered terrorist organizations by the United States under Executive Order 12957 to prohibit the United States from trading in Iran's oil industry. In May 1995, Clinton also issued Executive Order 12959 to prohibit the United States from trading with Iran. Trade with the United States, which had been growing since the end of the Iran-Iraq War, ended abruptly. President Clinton issued 2 executive orders that ended all trade with Iran and targeted their oil industry. Why was this such a big deal at the time? It revealed a contradiction. Iran and North Korea were both developing nuclear weapons and sponsoring terrorism. So why put an embargo and sanctions on Iran? After lifting sanctions on North Korea, wasn't North Korea's nuclear program more advanced than Iran's nuclear program at the time? Why did Clinton treat these two countries so differently? It had to do with two things: oil and money. Let me ask the question again. Why would Clinton lift sanctions on North Korea and then put heavy sanctions and an oil embargo on Iran? Sanctions have always been part of the game. It's a scam to fool the American people. The people are told that sanctions are a punishment for a country's bad behavior. It's a charade. Sanctions actually create an opportunity for the CIA shadow government. What kind of opportunity? When you sanction a country and cut off trade, you are removing their access to the world's banking system. That's supposed to be a punishment, but for CIA shadow government controlled countries, sanctions become a huge advantage. Sanctions allow the country to avoid money laundering laws or accountability. They become what's called a closed financial system. Sanctions promote corruption. Closed financial systems like Iran and North Korea allow the CIA shadow government to launder taxpayer money much more easily. They can avoid money laundering laws, and Congress doesn't track the money. Sanctions are a scam. President Clinton imposed strict sanctions on Iran's oil industry just 5 months after he had made a deal to provide oil for North Korea. Do you think this was a coincidence? Clinton and the CIA shadow government were going to get oil from Iran in order to give it to North Korea. How did they do it? Do you remember who Bill Clinton pardoned on the very last day of his presidency? Clinton pardoned 140 people and gave 36 commutations on his last day in office. The large amount of pardons on his last day was all a purposeful distraction. Clinton was hoping to lessen scrutiny over one highly controversial pardon. Do you remember Pardongate? Clinton pardoned someone who had been indicted by the DOJ in 1983 for tax evasion, racketeering, and wire fraud. He was the biggest tax evader in American history at the time. Do you remember Mark Rich? Clinton's pardon of Mark Rich created a firestorm that launched congressional and criminal investigations. It also outraged most Americans, even Democrats. Why would Clinton pardon Mark Rich, knowing how much of an uproar that this pardon would cause? Do you remember Mark Rich's background? According to the American Liberty Report, quote, Mark Rich, born Marcel Reich, was a notorious commodities trader and international financier who was convicted of tax fraud in the U.S. in the wake of oil purchases from Iran during the 1979 American hostage crisis. If that was Rich's only crime, Washington pundits and insiders might have been able to look the other way when Bill Clinton issued a presidential pardon for Rich on Clinton's last day in office, January 20th, 2001, end quote. Mark Rich was one of the biggest commodities traders in the world. He was indicted for tax evasion after he was caught trading Iranian oil during the hostage crisis that began after the 1979 Iranian Revolution. Are you seeing the connections? More from the American Liberty Report, quote, but the Iranian oil buys were just a drop in the bucket of Rich's long and storied career of negotiating metals and commodities deals for vilified dictators and despots around the world, including Libya's Muammar Gaddafi, North Korea's Kim Il-sung, Yugoslavia's Slobodan Milosevic, and the Philippines' Ferdinand Marcos, end quote. Mark Rich wasn't just a world-famous commodities trader, he was also an international financier. He specialized in trading commodities like oil to dictators around the world who were considered despots and outcasts from the world's financial system. Sanctions helped Mark Rich gain a lot of wealth because it limited his competition and forced desperate dictators to give him lucrative deals. Iran was desperate to sell their oil. Sanctions allowed Rich to buy Iranian oil way below market price and then sell it at a price much higher than market value to another country under sanctions. Rich was pocketing the difference, and that quickly made him a billionaire. He would buy or sell to any dictator who was facing sanctions. Mark Rich bought oil from Iran in 1979 when they were under an oil embargo because of American hostages. He then sold that Iranian oil to South Africa, which was also under sanctions for apartheid. Mark Rich was one of the few people in the world who had lots of contacts and front companies in order to ship oil and other commodities outside of the world's financial system. Rich was wanted as an international criminal, but he was never arrested. Why? Mark Rich was untouchable because he had deep connections to the CIA and Mossad. Rich traded commodities like oil to these rogue nations controlled by the CIA. Sanctions just allowed them to do it in secret. Can you see why Clinton gave a pardon to Mark Rich? The pardon was about one thing: money. Money is a factor in everything the Clintons have ever done. Was money also a factor in Clinton's nuclear deal with North Korea way back in 1994? What are the odds that Mark Rich helped the Clintons sell Iranian oil to North Korea for a huge profit? Rich had lots of experience buying Iranian oil when they were under sanctions and selling it to other despots like the leader in North Korea. He has lots of personal connections with both rogue nations. Did the Clintons get a share of that big oil deal? I think the odds are pretty high, and that's the real reason that Clinton pardoned Rich, even though he knew he would catch hell for it. Mark Rich was a famous fugitive. He was on the FBI's 10 most wanted list because he owed almost $50 million in back taxes to the US. That's why he fled the country and needed a pardon. Where did he flee to? According to the Washington Post, quote, Zug, Switzerland. For decades, traders from all over Europe have flocked to this lakeside alpine town, attracted by stringent privacy laws, low tax rates, and guarantees of corporate anonymity. But none has achieved the dominance of Mark Rich, the billionaire metals dealer and indicted tax fugitive pardoned by Bill Clinton in one of the last acts of his presidency. At the age of 66, after a lifetime of deal-making and sanctions breaking, Rich is the uncrowned king of Zug, a place that boasts 10,000 international companies, or roughly one corporation for every 2 residents. During the quarter century that he has been operating from Zug, including 17 years hiding from U.S. Marshals, Rich has mastered the art of clinching a deal with everyone from communist bureaucrats to third world dictators to Iranian ayatollahs. Many of the business practices cited in his 1983 indictment for racketeering by the Southern District of New York, trading with pariah states, manipulating the market for huge personal gain, hiding profits in a thicket of offshore companies, are techniques that he perfected here both before and after he got into trouble in the United States. End quote. The entire worldwide financial debt system is set up in a way where the privileged puppets are allowed to operate in countries with autonomy and protection. Switzerland has always been a hub of corruption. They have protected the untouchables with their banking privacy laws and the ability to set up a myriad of front companies to hide their crimes. More from the Washington Post, quote, "The list of countries that Rich has traded with reads like a compendium of rogue states. Iran during the hostage crisis, apartheid-era South Africa, Slobodan Milosevic's Yugoslavia, North Korea, Muammar Gaddafi's Libya, the Soviet Union under Leonid Brezhnev. He sees himself as a citizen of the world unencumbered by the laws of sovereign nations," said Howard Safier, a former U.S. Marshal who lay in wait outside Rich's Swiss residence in 1985 in one of several futile attempts to enforce an arrest warrant against Rich on charges of swindling U.S. taxpayers of nearly $50 million. His view is that everything and everyone can be bought and sold and government is irrelevant. End quote. U.S. Marshals attempted to arrest Rich several times in Switzerland because they wouldn't extradite him, but each time they failed because someone in the State Department would always tip him off. It is not surprising considering that Rich had deep ties to the CIA. The CIA uses sanctions to launder money for shadow government operations beyond congressional oversight. Rich had built up a huge network of front companies, shipping, and financial institutions to go along with his deep connections to the CIA and Mossad. And oil wasn't the only thing that Rich traded with despot dictators. What else did Mark Rich trade? According to foreignpolicy.com, quote, "An inveterate sanctions buster, Rich used offshore front companies and corporate cutouts to try to stay below the radar. He also pioneered the practice of commodity swaps like the uranium for oil deals he brokered in the 1980s between apartheid South Africa and Islamic Iran and Soviet Russia." End quote. Mark Rich pioneered the practice of uranium for oil commodity swaps back in the 1980s. He had connections to everyone and would sell anything to anybody. How do you think Iran and North Korea obtained uranium for their nuclear weapons programs? The CIA shadow government has always been behind the nuclear programs in all of these rogue states. The Clintons were also involved. When Bill Clinton traveled to North Korea in 2009 with Doug Band, they weren't just there to free hostages. They were looking to make a deal. Band was working for the Clinton Foundation and the Clinton Global Initiative. That's a key data point. What kind of deal was Clinton making with North Korea this time? Was it just another oil trade? Or was it something bigger? Remember, Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State in 2009 when her husband traveled to North Korea. That's not a coincidence. The Secretary of State position turned out to be very lucrative for the Clintons. Anybody remember the big story that broke in 2009 involving Hillary? Was it tied to Bill Clinton's hostage negotiations in North Korea? According to The Week, in March 2009, then Secretary of State Hillary Clinton made news by presenting Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov with a cartoonish reset button that included a bit of a translation error. The U.S. used the Russian word for overcharged, where reset should be. The button was supposed to symbolize newly inaugurated President Obama's outreach to Russia. In a way, it did. Gaffe aside, Obama was actually able to foster pretty good relations with Russian President Dmitry Medvedev. While Medvedev was president until early 2012, the two leaders negotiated new arms control treaty and safe passage for Afghanistan-bound U.S. troops through Russia. Medvedev agreed to approve tough UN sanctions on Iran, and Obama helped get Russia into the World Trade Organization. Obama and Hillary launched a very public Russian reset. This Russian reset was planned way ahead of time. What was the real purpose? Have you seen this portion of a Q drop 3 days before al-Walid's arrest in Saudi Arabia? Q drop number 48 of November 2nd, 2017. Quote, May 2020, BO, quote, Russia should be viewed as a friendly partner under Section 123, the Atomic Energy Act of 1954, after agreeing to a new nuclear weapons reduction deal and helping U.S. with Iran. Who is the enemy? What is being continually stated by all Ds? Russia is what? What did Russia reset really provide? Clearance, pathway to complete the U1 deal? Why is the Canadian PM so important? They never thought they were going to lose. The calm before the storm. End quote. A Russian reset helped set the public narrative that Russia was no longer our enemy. Why was that important? It cleared a pathway for the Uranium One deal. Don't miss that question that Q asked. Why is the Canadian Prime Minister so important? There were several important players in this deal connected to Canada. This is one reason why Trudeau was panicked. Q drop number 46 of November 2nd, 2017. Why is the information re BO important re U1 and export approval to Canada to EU? Where is BO today? Did BO and or his admin ever make false statements that U1 would never be exported from the US? Who made those statements? Who did they report to? Why is this relevant? When the Uranium One story was exposed, President Obama assured the American people that none of the uranium would ever leave America. Was he telling the truth? According to The Hill, quote, after the Obama administration approved the sale of a Canadian mining company with significant U.S. uranium reserves to a firm owned by Russia's government, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission assured Congress and the public the new owners couldn't export any raw nuclear fuel from America's shores. No uranium produced at either facility may be exported, the NRC declared in a November 2010 press release that announced that ARMZ, a subsidiary of the Russian state-owned Rosatom, had been approved to take ownership of the Uranium One mining firm and its American assets. A year later, the nuclear regulator repeated the assurance in a letter to Senator John Barrasso, a Wyoming Republican in whose state Uranium One operated mines. Neither Uranium One Inc. nor AMRZ holds a specific NRC export license. In order to export uranium from the United States, Uranium One Inc. or ARMZ would need to apply for and obtain a specific NRC license authorizing the export of uranium for use in reactor fuel. Then NRC Chairman Gregory Jaczko wrote to Barrasso. End quote. The Nuclear Regulatory Commission assured the American people and Congress that Uranium One couldn't export American uranium because they didn't have an export license. Was that true? More from The Hill. Quote, yet NRC memos reviewed by The Hill show that it did approve the shipment of yellowcake uranium, the raw material used to make nuclear fuel and weapons, from the Russian-owned mines in the United States to Canada in 2012 through a third party. Later, the Obama administration approved some of that uranium going all the way to Europe, government documents show, end quote. While the Obama administration and the Nuclear Regulatory Commission were both telling the American people that it wasn't possible for uranium to be exported because they didn't have an export license, the truth is that they had secretly allowed them to export the uranium to Europe. How did they keep it secret? More from The Hill. Quote, NRC officials told The Hill that Uranium One exports flowed from Wyoming to Canada and on to Europe between 2012 and 2014, and the approval involved a process with multiple agencies. Rather than give Rosatom a direct export license, which would have raised red flags inside a Congress already suspicious of the deal, the NRC in 2012 authorized an amendment to an existing export license for a Paducah, Kentucky-based trucking firm called RSB Logistics Services, Inc., to simply add uranium-1 to the list of clients whose uranium it could move to Canada. The license, reviewed by The Hill, is dated March 16, 2012, and it increased the amount of uranium ore concentrate that RSB Logistics could ship to the Chemico Corp plant in Ontario from 7.5 million kilograms to 12 million kilograms, and added uranium-1 to the other parties to export. The move escaped notice in Congress. End quote. Obama and Hillary did not give uranium-1 an export license because that would have attracted the attention of Congress. Instead, they just added U1 to RSB Logistics Services' already approved list of companies who could export uranium using their trucking company. That's how they hid it from Congress. Uranium-1 controlled roughly 20% of the uranium in the United States. Rosatom was Russia's nuclear energy agency, and it was allowed by the Obama administration to purchase uranium-1 in 2010 through a subsidiary called ARMZ. All along, Hillary claimed to have nothing to do with the decision to allow the uranium-1 sale to Russia, even though, as Secretary of State, her office approval was necessary for the deal to go through. She was desperately trying to disconnect completely from this huge story. Why? What was she trying to hide? A Russian reset had allowed Russia to control a majority of the world's uranium. Why would Hillary allow Russia to get a hold of so much uranium and then just 6 years later accuse Putin of helping Trump to steal the 2016 election? What's the real story? According to the New York Times, quote, "But the untold story behind that story is one that involves not just the Russian president, but also a former American president and a woman who would like to be the next one." At the heart of the tale are several men, leaders of the Canadian mining industry, who have been major donors to the charitable endeavors of former President Bill Clinton and his family. Members of that group built, financed, and eventually sold off to the Russians a company that would become known as Uranium-1, end quote. Does it surprise anybody that money is at the heart of this story? Isn't everything connected to the Clintons always centered around money? Money is what the Clintons love more than anything because it gives them power. While most of this story focuses on the uranium in America being controlled by Russia, there is a bigger part of this story that most people know nothing about. There was a group of big Canadian miners at the center of this story, and it's not just centered around Canada. There's another important country that is connected to uranium-1 that I bet most people have never heard mentioned. More from the New York Times. Quote, "Beyond mines in Kazakhstan that are among the most lucrative in the world, the sale gave the Russians control of 1/5 of all uranium production capacity in the United States. Since uranium is considered a strategic asset with implications for national security, the deal had to be approved by a committee composed of representatives from a number of United States government agencies. Among the agencies that eventually signed off was the State Department, then headed by Mr. Clinton's wife, Hillary Rodham Clinton," end quote. It wasn't just agencies that needed to approve this deal, as most of the Obama cabinet needed to approve it too. The State Department had to sign off on any deal to sell uranium-1 to Russia. It wasn't just about uranium in America. It was also about uranium in Kazakhstan. That's very important to remember. More from the New York Times. Quote, "As the Russians gradually assumed control of uranium-1 in 3 separate transactions from 2009 to 2013, Canadian records show a flow of cash made its way to the Clinton Foundation. Uranium One's chairman used his family foundation to make 4 donations totaling $2.35 million. Those contributions were not publicly disclosed by the Clintons, despite an agreement Mrs. Clinton had struck with the Obama White House to publicly identify all donors. Other people with ties to the company made donations as well. And shortly after the Russians announced their intention to acquire a majority stake in Uranium One, Mr. Clinton received $500,000 for a Moscow speech from a Russian investment bank with links to the Kremlin that was promoting Uranium One stock, end quote. Don't miss that key point. There was cash from this deal flowing into the Clinton Foundation, and it was revealed through Canadian records. The Clintons didn't report these donations, even though Hillary had publicly promised that she would report all donations when she took the job as Secretary of State. Do you think that Obama didn't know about these contributions to the Clintons? Who were these big contributors? Have you ever heard of Frank Giustra? More from the New York Times, quote, "The path to a Russian acquisition of American uranium deposits began in 2005 in Kazakhstan, where the Canadian mining financier Frank Giustra orchestrated his first big uranium deal with Mr. Clinton at his side. The two men had flown aboard Mr. Giustra's private jet to Almaty, Kazakhstan, where they dined with the authoritarian president Nursultan A. Nazarbayev. Mr. Clinton handed the Kazakh president a propaganda coup when he expressed support for Mr. Nazarbayev's bid to head an international elections monitoring group undercutting American foreign policy, and criticism of Kazakhstan's poor human rights record by, among others, his wife, then a senator. Within days of the visit, Mr. Giustra's fledgling company, Eurasia Energy Limited, signed a preliminary deal giving it stakes in 3 uranium mines controlled by the state-run uranium agency Kazatomprom, end quote. Did you know that the plan for the Uranium One deal actually began in 2005? Frank Giustra owned a small mining company called Eurasia Energy. He partnered with his friend Bill Clinton, and they flew to Kazakhstan, where the leader agreed to sell portions of their state-owned uranium mines for a kickback. That turned Giustra's small company into a major player in the uranium industry. Eurasia Energy getting stakes in uranium mines in Kazakhstan was just the beginning of this deal. How much did this benefit the Clintons? More from the New York Times. Still, the company's story was hardly front-page news in the United States until early 2008. In the midst of Mrs. Clinton's failed presidential campaign, when the Times published an article revealing the 2005 trip's link to Mr. Giustra's Kazakhstan mining deal, it also reported that several months later, Mr. Giustra had donated $31.3 million to Mr. Clinton's foundation, end quote. Bill Clinton flies with Giustra to Kazakhstan, and he gets a sweetheart deal on some lucrative uranium mines, and a few months later, he donates over $31 million to the Clinton Foundation, Giustra to Clinton, quid pro quo. Those really valuable uranium mines in Kazakhstan helped Giustra make even more lucrative deals. More from the New York Times, quote, "If the Kazakh deal was a major victory, Eurasia did not wait long before resuming the hunt. In 2007, it merged with Uranium One, a South African company with assets in Africa and Australia, in what was described as a $3.5 billion transaction. The new company, which kept the Uranium One name, was controlled by Eurasia investors, including Ian Telfer, a Canadian who became chairman. Through a spokeswoman, Mr. Giustra, whose personal stake in the deal was estimated at about $45 million, said he's sold his stake in 2007, end quote. Just 2 years after the Kazakhstan deal, Giustra merged his company with a South African company called Uranium One. It was a $3.5 billion deal that put Justra in control of the new company. Justra then sold his stake in the company for $45 million. A Canadian friend of Justra named Ian Telfer then became chairman and also gave large donations to the Clinton Foundation. How large? From the New York Times, quote, "To avoid the perception of conflicts of interests, beyond the ban on foreign government donations, the foundation was required to publicly disclose all contributors. To judge from those disclosures, which list the contributions in ranges rather than precise amounts, the only Uranium One officials to give the Clinton Foundation was Mr. Telfer, the chairman, and the amount was relatively small, no more than $250,000, and that was in 2007, before talk of a Rosatom deal began percolating," end quote. This is important to understand. Before there was even talk about Russia buying Uranium One, the chairman of Uranium One had already donated around $250,000 to the Clinton. As Secretary of State, Hillary was supposed to disclose all contributors to the Clinton Foundation in order to avoid a conflict of interest, especially foreign donors. Does anybody think the Clintons have ever worried about that? The New York Times says that Ian Telfer was the only person connected to Uranium One that donated to the Clinton Foundation, and it was only $250,000. Was that really all that Telfer donated to the Clinton Foundation? According to the Clinton Foundation tax records, that was all he donated. Does anybody trust the Clintons' tax records? More from the New York Times, quote, "But a review of tax records in Canada, where Mr. Telfer has a family charity called the Fernwood Foundation, shows that he donated millions of dollars more during and after the critical time when the Foreign Investment Committee was reviewing his deal with the Russians. His donations through the Fernwood Foundation included $1 million reported in 2009, the year his company appealed to the American Embassy to help it keep its mines in Kazakhstan. $250,000 in 2010, the year the Russians sought majority control, as well as $600,000 in 2011 and $500,000 in 2012. Mr. Telfer's undisclosed donations came in addition to between $1.3 million and $5.6 million in contributions, which were reported from a constellation of people with ties to Uranium One or Eurasia, the company that originally acquired Uranium One's most valuable asset, the Kazakh mines," end quote. Telfer had actually given millions to the Clinton, and they never reported it. We know this because of Canadian tax records from Telfer's foundation. The Clintons committed tax evasion, the same crime that Mark Rich was charged with and got a pardon for. How ironic. There were also a lot of people connected to Uranium One who gave millions to the Clinton Foundation, and we're still supposed to believe that Hillary had nothing to do with the decision to allow Uranium One to be sold to Russia. Can you see why she was trying to convince everyone that she didn't have any say in the deal going through? Uranium One was originally a South African company. That's a key data point. Is it just a coincidence that Mark Rich had deep ties to commodity trading in South Africa and is an expert at uranium for oil swaps? I don't think so. The purchase of those uranium mines in Kazakhstan was a huge deal and is directly connected to the Uranium One deal. How is Mark Rich tied to all this stuff? The same way that the Clintons are, through a couple of close associates of Mark Rich. According to the New York Post, quote, "Rich died in 2013, but his business partners, lawyers, advisors, and friends have showered millions of dollars on the Clintons in the decade and a half following the scandal." Nigerian businessman Gilbert Chaguri is well known as a close ally and business associate of Rich. The Nigerian media declared in 1999 that the, quote, "Gilbert Chaguri-Mark Rich alliance remains a formidable foe. They sold oil on international markets together. In 2000, Chaguri was convicted in Geneva of money laundering and aiding a criminal organization in connection with the billions of dollars stolen from Nigeria during the reign of dictator General Sani Abacha. End quote. Gilbert Chagoury was a close friend and business partner with Mark Rich. He was convicted of money laundering in connection with the theft of billions of dollars stolen in Nigeria, but he got the conviction expunged in a plea deal. More from the New York Post. Quote, Chagoury has been very generous to the Clintons in the years following the Rich pardon. He has organized an event at which Bill was paid $100,000 to speak in 2003, donated millions to the Clinton Foundation, and in 2009 pledged a cool $1 billion to the Clinton Global Initiative. The Chagourys were also active in Hillary's 2008 presidential bid. Michelle Chagoury, a relative in Los Angeles, was a bundler and served on her campaign staff. Numerous other relatives gave the maximum $4,600 each to her campaign, end quote. Gilbert Chagoury, the Nigerian thief, gave millions to the Clinton Foundation and also pledged $1 billion to the Clinton Global Initiative. Remember, the Clinton Global Initiative was the brainchild of Clinton's right-hand man, Doug Band, the same Doug Band who accompanied Bill Clinton to North Korea in 2009 to cut a deal for a couple hostages. More from the New York Post. Quote, in 2009, CGI, Clinton Global Initiative, gave Chagoury's company an award for sustainable development. In 2013, Bill showed up in Nigeria for a public ceremony involving one of Chagoury's projects. When Bill Clinton had his 60th birthday party, Chagoury was an invited guest. Chagoury also attended the wedding of Bill's longtime aide, Doug Band, end quote. It wasn't just America for sale. The Clinton Global Initiative put the whole world up for sale. Chagoury was able to pledge $1 billion to the Clinton Global Initiative because he had stolen billions from Nigeria. Then Clinton had the gall to travel to Nigeria for a public ceremony celebrating one of Chagoury's projects. Do you think Bill or Hillary Clinton didn't have a hand in expunging Chagoury's conviction? Chagoury even attended Doug Band's wedding. Almost all of the money flowing through the Clinton Global Initiative went through Doug Band. But Chagoury wasn't the only close friend and associate of Mark Rich who had deep ties to the Clinton. There was also a Russian, which shouldn't surprise anyone since uranium-1 was being sold to the Russians. Have you heard the name Sergei Kurzin? More from the New York Post. Quote, then there's Russian investor Sergei Kurzin. He worked for Mark Rich in the 1990s, traveling around Russia looking for suitable investment opportunities in the crumbled former Soviet Union. As an engineer by training, Kurzin had been involved in lucrative deals in Kazakhstan and other countries, including the lucrative uranium-1 deal that involved Bill Clinton and Frank Giustra. Russia bought 20% of all uranium production capacity in the U.S., a deal that needed to be signed off on by the State Department when it was headed by Hillary Clinton. While the deal was going through, Bill Clinton was paid $500,000 to give a speech in Moscow, paid for by a Russian investment bank promoting the uranium deal. Kurzin, meanwhile, donated $1 million to the Clinton Foundation, end quote. Sergei Kurzin was in on the Eurasia uranium deal in Kazakhstan. He made a lot of money also in the sale of uranium-1 to Russia. Here's an important point. When it all got exposed, everyone suspected that Hillary, as Secretary of State, was pushing hard for the Russian reset to facilitate the sale of uranium-1 to Russia. But how many people knew that it was Bill Clinton who got the ball rolling on the coming uranium-1 deal way back in September of 2005? That's when he made his trip to Kazakhstan aboard Frank Giustra's private plane and cut a deal for 3 of the best uranium mines in the world, which benefited them and their Russian partner, Sergei Kurzin. Q told the Anons that this was a planned Clinton deal from the beginning. A portion of Q drop number 1345 of May 12th, 2018 Reread Crumb's Re-Iran. It was never about worldwide safety and security. It was never about nuclear disarmament. It was about opening a new untapped market. It was about securing a black site, the exchange. You won. Risk the welfare of the world. Why? Money. Organized, planned by Bill Clinton, Hillary Rodham Clinton, carried out by Hussein. Remember, HRC ran against Hussein. You won. Donations to CF, $1.7 billion in cash transfer to Iran, 4 routes, 5 planes. The entire Uranium One deal was organized and planned by the Clintons. It was carried out by the Obama administration. After seeing how successful the money deal was for Uranium One, Obama cut a nuclear deal with Iran that was worth billions. I talked about Obama's Iran nuclear deal in my article entitled Panic in DC. Can you see all the connections to Uranium One? Bill Clinton had secured some of the best uranium mines in the world in 2005, and just 4 years later, he was flying to North Korea with his aide, Doug Band, to cut a deal for 2 hostages. What do you want to bet? That secret deal included uranium for North Korea. What do you want to bet the Clintons and all their cronies made a lot of money on the deal? I'm not done with the Uranium One story. Next up, I'm going to now get to Senator Chuck Grassley and this Q drop, number 228 of November 25th, 2017. USA leadership change, SA leadership change, GER leadership change, PAK leadership change, 40,000 feet, 8765, ... Q. In my next article, we're going to take a 40,000-foot view of this whole situation. And that is the latest from Joe Lange. Check him out on his Substack. Check out, and that's badlands.substack.com. Go to tulipblooms.shop or epicminerals.net. Just to give you an example, epicminerals.net, the zeolite extra spray, it binds to stuff. Like if you got one of the things I've heard enormously, and I've been getting rid of phlegm like crazy. And one of the things that zeolite does is it helps you get rid of crap that seems stuck inside of you. Like getting rid of like persistent phlegm that you can't get rid of. Zeolite extra spray right in your throat. Bam, you're good to go. So check it out at epicminerals.net. And right now, for a limited time, one-time only use promo code FREEDOM30 for a full 30% off everything on the Epic Minerals website. It's one use only, so make it count. Same with tulipblooms.shop. Right. Thank you, everybody, so much for watching. And don't forget to go to, if you're watching on Rumble, hit the like button. Check me out on Twitter, pgunnels1, or check me out on Substack. Really good platform. It allows live streaming now. So go to readingepicthreads.substack.com. I'm this close to having guest writers start publishing there, so get ready for that as well. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Let us pray. Saint Michael the Archangel, defend us in battle. Be our protection against the wickedness and snares of the devil. May God rebuke him, we humbly pray. And do thou, O Prince of the heavenly host, by the power of God cast into hell Satan and all evil spirits who prowl about the world seeking the ruin of souls. Amen. I love you all. Thank you so much for being here, and I will see you tomorrow.